All right. So today's a fun class. It's basically, so we're going to have classes on like, what to do with pests and diseases and weeds and specific things like that. But then there's like all different kinds of like individual tips that you're supposed to just like learn as you go. But what we've been doing is kind of like recording all these tips that we learn as we go. And every year I add like, another 5 or 10 of them. But like they're more like specific to individual crops, like how to prune a tomato or how to hand pollinate a squash plant or, things like that. So yeah, so this class is just going to be a whole bunch of tips around different kinds of vegetables, like planting, maintenance, and harvesting. Or actually, we're going to have a whole class on harvesting, so not so much on harvesting. But it's going to be a lot. So like I said, you don't need to learn all of this stuff. Just kind of pick up the things that you think are relevant right now. And then you have the class recording and the PDF, and you'll pick up all this stuff. Like when you get to your tomato and you're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be pruning this. What am I supposed to do? Then the hope is you can go back to, recordings or the PowerPoint and see what to do, or YouTube something better, if it works for you as well. But just the thought, yeah, the most important part is you need to know that you need to prune a tomato. So on that note, we'll get started. So the sections are going to be planning tips, planting tips, and maintenance tips. So planning tips. So we're going to dive a little bit more into planning. We're going to talk a little bit about planning in almost every class, just because it's a lot to kind of encompass. I think someday we'll have a whole class just on planning, but right now we're just going to kind of we talked a lot about it in the last class, so we don't need to dive too deeply into it, but I just want to show a couple more designs, different types of garden designs, from just simple boxes and circles. So if you want to get artistic and label the numbers, and then you can have a whatever you call the thing on the map, where you can match up the numbers so you know which one's the key, or square foot gardening, if you want to, so there's lots of different ways to do. The most important part is you make a garden design, even if you change it, completely, make your notes. And then this, it's going to seem not that important, but then next January, when you're like, all right, now what am I going to do? What am I going to do better? How am I going to rotate my crops? It's going to be really important next year to have that, some kind of a map of what you did, this year. So definitely at least try to do something, even if it's just a really simple one. Or you can also do it afterwards. You can just go ahead and wing it and plant your garden, and then, make the, try to make the design afterwards based on how you planted. Which is definitely how I did it the first couple of years. We talked a lot about this already, the summer crops versus spring crops. So, but you'll see this slide a couple times, because this is really important to understand that, the summer crops are May to like October. Cool crops are spring and fall. These summer crops will die if a frost touches them, because it's got these yeah, the cells are made of water, so when they freeze, they burst. But then spring and fall crops have to do this really cool thing where they actually convert carbs to sugars, and they make sugar water when there's a frost, and which freezes at a lower temperature, so they can not only can they survive frost, but they actually taste way better when they get cold. But these plants will survive during the summer. They'll just be kind of more bitter. Some of them will flower and bolt. Some of them will die. They'll have lots of pest issues and stuff. So. Um, oh, what happened here? That was weird. Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. So someone tried to, yeah, the Teams, the Microsoft Teams is just the worst, because it's like embedded into our, it's embedded into our invite. So people might join. So hopefully that won't happen again. I need to figure out how to get that out of my invite. But anyway, so we have cool weather crops, that can survive the summer, just don't taste as well, and then they really taste the best, and they do the best in spring and fall. Some warm weather stops cannot survive any kind of frost; they will die. Um, but on that note, so there's really, when it comes to cool weather crops, so you plant, if you're planning on doing a spring garden, and you don't have to, like they said, if you're a beginning gardener, just wait till like mid-May, go to a nursery, buy the things that you love to eat, and then just plant them in the ground and water them until they die, and then hopefully in fall, that's the simple, and then maybe buy a bag of mulch and cover your garden in the winter. But if you want to start incorporating more like spring gardens and fall gardens and things like that and cool weather crops, it does take a little bit more planning, but definitely there's like two options that that I've at least found around doing spring and fall gardens. And so we'll kind of divide the groups into like these two different types of crops. I don't know if there's exact words for this, but there's like there's cool weather crops like a cabbage. So a cabbage is like I grow that cabbage, I get one head. When I cut it off, that's it. The cabbage is done. So that's like a one-time thing. But then you have lots of what's cool about a lot of cool weather crops is a lot of you can just keep on harvesting them really for the whole year. I mean, if you're doing it right, and those are like kale and collards and chard and mustard and Brussels sprouts and things. Because ideally, like I said, we'll have a whole class on harvesting, so we'll get more deeper into it. But like this is a kale plant, and you're just snapping the plants on the bottom and kind of working your way up. And as long as you don't harvest more than like 2/3 of the plant, it's just going to keep on producing kale for the whole time. And really, I mean, you can grow it all year, and then it's going to be like a palm tree, a mini little palm tree by fall. But there's really two options around, doing cool weather crops. You can do a spring garden, which that's like, March, April. You plant your kale, your collards, you harvest them a whole bunch, lettuces and cabbage and whatever, and then come around like May, June, when it's time to do a summer garden, you just rip all those cool weather crops out, and then you plant your summer stuff, and then you grow that summer stuff till like maybe like August, September, and then you just rip all that stuff out, and then you plant your fall garden, like another round of little kale seedlings and collard seedlings and chard and all that stuff. And if you do it right, you can, if they're mature enough by like November, you can keep them alive all winter. You sometimes have to give them a little winter protection, which we'll talk more about that later. Like a little mini hoop that protects them from, with a cloth that protects it from the winter winds, but also allows water and sunlight to get in. You can even grow them all winter, and then they'll keep on growing in early spring, and usually about April or so, they're just done, and they'll at that point you want to rip them out, or they're just going to start rotting and getting all kinds of pests and stuff. So that's one option, is you grow your spring seedlings, rip them all out, then plant your summer, and then rip those out, and then plant your fall, and then if you do, if you want to, you can grow that all winter. So another option is you can grow these, and this is an option if you have the space. A lot of people don't have the space. Like if you have one raised bed, you really need to, option one might be great. But if you have option two, if you have enough, like say you have two raised beds and you want to grow your cool weather crops all year, and then on the other bed, you can, plant tomatoes and all that stuff. So that works too. There's just some considerations. So the same thing, you plant your spring garden, March, April, you plant your kale, collards, and all that stuff. And then you just, this, I'm sorry, this is, oh man. Okay. Yeah, it keeps on that Microsoft Teams keeps on popping up. All right. Well, anyway, we'll just work through it, I guess. So then you can plant your cool weather crops. And then instead of ripping them out, you just keep them growing. And what's going to happen is like they're going to be really sweet and tasty in the spring when it's cool out. But then when it hits like June and it starts getting hot out, one, they're going to get, I mean, they're so edible, and especially if you cook them down, but they're not going to be as sweet. They're going to be a little bit more bitter. Some of them may not survive. Some of them may flower. But you're also going to get tons of pest issues, like pests, like especially this harlequin beetle, sometimes this cabbage looper. They're just going to come out and eat up your, and they start eating holes into your leaves. And then those holes, if you don't squish them quick enough, or if you don't use pest covers, then that starts to rot. Which is, but it's fine. I mean, you could just pull that. I mean, I wouldn't eat that leaf. I would just pull that off. And so we did that last year, and we grew, kale and collards, all summer, and we still managed to get a decent amount of crops. I mean, you want to like dunk them in some cold water to kind of, get them before you eat them or serve them, like just kind of get like that like summer heat off of them. But what's interesting, they didn't taste as great, but then, once it started cooling down again in spring, in like August and or so, then they started, getting sweet again. So all their leaves, the new leaves coming out in September started being, sweet, and then like they started having less pest and disease issues and all that stuff. So, yeah, and what's great about that is then all of a sudden you're in August and September and you have these fully mature, awesome producing kale plants instead of like, popping in a seedling and then having to wait a month or so before you start harvesting them. So those are kind of your two options with your cool weather crops. Like I said, you can do a spring and then a fall garden, or you can just grow them all year and then just know in the summer it's going to be a battle. Like we're going to try these pest covers, these lightweight, screens that allow sunlight and stuff to come in, and hoping that we're going to do that at Letter, and hopefully that's going to help us in the summer so we don't have to deal with so many harlequin beetles and cabbage loopers. So. But I just want to give those two options if you're growing some cool weather crops, and they both have positives and negatives. All right, and then now I'm just going to go through a whole bunch of different tips and stuff, especially for like beginner gardeners. I made a slide of just like easy things to grow. So when you're looking, if you're like a beginner gardener and you're just looking for some easy things, that's hopefully you'll get big successes. Definitely think small fruits. Like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants. The small stuff, like this is a sun gold cherry tomato. It's such a delicious. It's like one of the highest sugar contents of any tomato. It's like a super sweet, delicious tomato, and they just blow up. I mean, you get so many of them. So cherry tomatoes are much easier because there's a small window for them growing. As opposed to like a heirloom tomato, like a Brandywine, which is like one of those huge, size of a small head tomatoes. Those things take forever to ripen, and while they're ripening, you got to battle pests and diseases and tomato cracking and all this other stuff. So it's just a lot harder. And same with peppers. Like jalapenos are super easy to grow. Big bell peppers are a lot harder. Eggplants, those big Italian eggplants are hard to grow. Like things are going to eat them oftentimes before you get to them. But they make an Asian eggplant that are just like mini ones, or they make these small ball eggplants that taste just the same. Sometimes they have more unique tastes, but a lot of times they just taste the same, but they're much easier to grow. So I definitely recommend, smaller fruit things if you're beginners. And then like beans and peas are super easy, lettuces, kale, collards, and chard. You do get some pests in this area with these plants, but as long as there's a small space and you check it every once in a while and you don't mind hand squishing or knocking them in soapy water, is fine. Summer squash is like super productive. Okra is like the easiest. If you just want a super easy plant, garden, just plant nothing but okra. Okra and strawberries for sure, so easy. The hard part about okra is like harvesting the okra before it gets too big and woody, like because they just start pumping stuff out and it's hard to keep up with them. Root crops are fine. Root crops, I mean, it take a while. If you don't fluff up your soil really well, it can take a long time. But then you just leave them on the ground, and when they're ripe, like we had some beets that we planted in this raised bed last year that we didn't take the time to really improve the soil, and we just left them in the bed for a whole year. It came back next spring and harvested them. So it's definitely a lot less pest issues and stuff. And then like lots of herbs as well. Herbs are pretty easy. So if you're looking for easy starter plants or starter garden, this is a great list. And then if you so this is another big problem with urban gardening is definitely theft, especially if you're not in the fenced-in garden. Like half of our gardens have a pretty good fence and the other half don't. But even the ones with the fence, sometimes people will climb over the fence and vandalize them or things like that. But definitely our gardens that are more open, or if you're growing in your backyard and you don't have a privacy fence, there's going to be a chance that you're going to, get some things stolen. It just happens. This is part of urban ag. And, I mean, if you're going to steal anything, I mean, I guess you're going to, it's good to steal food. So hopefully people are eating, hopefully you're feeding people, even though if that, yeah, it makes you feel a little bit better. But so if you have a chance of getting theft, there's some things that you want to definitely avoid. Melons. So everyone wants to do like cantaloupes and watermelons, but my first garden, we just had a little pallet fence. It wasn't anything protective, and people would come out with like grocery bags and just fill up, from people's plots. And every year somebody, everyone always was so excited about melons. They would come out because it's exciting. You come out every day and you see this little baby melon that's getting bigger and bigger, and you're knocking on it and you're so excited. And usually like a week before it ripens, someone steals it, and it's just devastating. So big things like large tomatoes, large peppers, large eggplants. Again, corn is like someone's going to take your corn unless it's like a protected area. People are going to take that corn before. I don't think I've ever successfully grown corn in the public garden before. So just avoid the big things, and then maybe focus again on the smaller things, and which is are also easier as well, as like the cherry tomatoes, mini eggplants, okra, spinaches, root crops that are in the ground. Not everyone knows what the top of a root crop looks like. And same with potatoes and sweet potatoes. This one though, I think this is like the gold standard for theft proof. So this is called a green zebra tomato. It's super tasty, especially if you like tomato sandwiches with like sliced tomatoes and mayonnaise. It's got like a zesty kind of tomatoey taste. And what's great about this is it ripens when it's still kind of green looking. So like these yellowish green ones up here are ripe ones, and these are just about ripe. So people are going to wait for them to turn red, and then you're going to, while they're waiting, you're going to harvest the ripe ones. So definitely, this is a fantastic one. And there's a lot of other tomatoes that ripen in different colors. So, but these, they look like they're, most green tomatoes that are going to turn red, but then they turn this like light yellowish orange, and then yeah, it's a good one to kind of throw people off. And then it's a good idea to have a section of your garden that's full of herbs and flowers, native flowers. And we're going to talk more about this in the pest class, but some of the best things you could do for pest protection is to create an ecosystem that's going to attract, things like ladybugs. Ladybugs are killers. I mean, they will just devour all your pests, like your aphids and things like that. So, but the thing is once they're done eating your aphids, if there's no nectar plants, if there's no plants that have nectar and stuff, they're just going to fly away. But if you plant, usually the rule of thumb is about a quarter of your garden should be herbs and flowers. And native flowers are more likely to attract native bugs as well. But if you can plant enough of these, flowers and herbs, what's going to happen is those ladybugs, after they're done eating the aphids, they're going to hang around and start a family in your flower bed. And then when the aphids come back, they're going to take care of them. So I don't know a whole lot about herbs and flowers, so I just kind of wrote some key ones that we've had a lot of success with, like perennials. So there's two different kinds of plants. Plants are, I say that a lot. The plants are divided in a lot of different categories, but one category is perennial versus annual. So perennial are plants that survive every year and live many years. So those could be fruit trees, they could be lavender plants, they could be lemon balm or mint. And then annuals are ones that you have to replant every year. Usually, so a lot of annuals would be perennials, but they can't survive our harsh winter. And that's true with some of these, like so like lavender, rosemary, thyme, oregano, all these things are fantastic, and they should survive most winters. Definitely a really harsh winter will take out a few of them, like rosemary, but for the most part, they'll survive that winters. But perennial, then there's some perennials like lemon balm and lemongrass that you want to, dig, either keep in a container or dig up and throw in a container and bring it inside during the winter, because they won't survive the winter. And you can either, get some lights and keep them growing in your basement, or you can actually put them in a dark, cool area and with no light, no consistent lights, and they'll kind of just go dormant. And then you can, kind of bring them back to life in the spring and replant them. And then mint is like definitely a perennial, but if you ever plant a mint or anything in the mint family, like spearmint or all these, there's a whole bunch of different mints, it just takes over. It's not an invasive plant, but it acts like an invasive plant. So you'd never want to plant mint in your garden bed, because you're going to be fighting it for years. So always plant it in a container, and that way you don't ever have to worry about it, spreading. And then your cool weather, and then you have annuals. Annuals, are divided in cool weather and warm weather. So, cilantro, we always do like cilantro and dill. Dill is a fantastic, for pollinators, like bees and aphids, or bees and ladybugs and stuff. They love dill. And then warm weather stuff, you know, when so in May you can start planting your basil and borage and chamomile and things like that. So definitely, you know, have, you know, like it's recommended around quarter of your garden, and you could spread it around. It doesn't have to be one area. I like to make a perimeter around my garden with like perennial herbs. That would be the kind of a windbreak, and then plant my annual herbs, you know, in the middle. But you can, you know, put it anywhere you want. Just have that in your garden somewhere, and that's going to help you build an ecosystem that's going to take care of a lot of your pest issues. And then flowers as well. I mean, ideally you want native flowers, or at least not invasive flowers. There's nothing wrong with non-natives as long as they're not invasive. But native flowers are more likely to attract, you know, different, you know, native insects. But again, like, you know, quarter garden of flowers and herbs. But I wrote out just some really great flowers. And some of these flowers are also herbs as well, like dill. Dill's an herb, but it's also a really great, you know, when it flowers, it's just, if you let it go to flower, it just attracts all kinds of great, you know, insects to your garden. So a lot of that, and then like annuals and perennials. So here's just these are just a list of ones that we tried that work really well. You can find, you know, lots of different great lists for Mid-Atlantic, for DC, for Maryland. You know, there's tons of different lists, but definitely try to get in the habit of planting some kind of herbs and flowers. And then yeah, a lot of these things, I mean, commercially they use a lot of pesticides, but you don't want to, because you're just going to kill all these amazing, you know, ladybugs you're attracting to your garden. And then crop rotation. So this is something. So this is something. If you're a beginner gardener, we can make it really simple. And then if you're starting to get some experience and you feel like you can handle it, we can talk about how to get, you know, into a 4-year cycle. But basically, I mean, don't, you know, like I say, if you're a beginner gardener, basically the idea is don't plant the same crop in the same place every year. So if you plant tomatoes in the same spot every year, one, it's going to deplenish a specific types of nutrients. So you may be low in a certain thing that it loves, you know, in your soil, nutrients in your soil. And then two, all the bugs, you know, the tomato hornworms, all that stuff that love tomatoes, they're going to be like, well, I know every year, I mean, the tomatoes are coming up, so I'm going to lay my, you know, my eggs and stuff, or I'm going to hibernate or whatever in that area, because I'm going, you know, there's going to be tomatoes in the next May for me. So the idea is you want, just, you know, mix it up. And sometimes it's hard if you have a raised bed. So raised beds, I usually just cut it in half, and I try to just, like, you know, plant, you know, just, I have 2 zones and I switch those zones, you know, tomatoes on one side one year and then tomatoes on the other side. If you want to get a little bit deeper into it, they ideally, the recommended rotation is a 4-year cycle, because that allows your nutrients and everything in your soil to completely rebound, and at the same time it confuses pests enough. So if you're ready for a 4-year cycle, try to make zones in your garden and then move that every year. And I definitely recommend having a legume zone or a nitrogen fixer. So these are peas in the spring and beans in the summer. And then if you do that in one zone, and it grabs nitrogen from the air and deposits it in the soil, and you do that every year, and you mix it around a different area, you're just going to be fertilizing your garden all, you know, at the same time, especially if you follow up like your big heavy feeders. Is another one. So if you have like heavy feeders, like, you know, tomatoes and you know, eggplants and things that just, you know, absorb an enormous amount of nutrients, and if you follow that behind that, you know, that following year, if you plant some peas and beans, that's going to really help kind of balance your soil. So like I said, you can make it, you know, it could be very simple. Just don't plant the same thing every year in the same spot. Or if you want to take it on and try it out, try to do a 4-year cycle. And then, yeah, you can also see the heavy feeders versus, you know, this is a heavy feeders versus light feeders. So you can try to, you know, put it in 2 zones and flip them back and forth, just however it works best for you. But I do recommend, though, taking some time to understand your vegetable families. So once you buy all your seeds, you know, pull them out and divide them into vegetable families. And what the goal is is so this is especially true for like brassicas. Brassicas are your kale, collards, and broccoli. So there is a lot of pests in this area that love brassicas. And if you plant all of your brassicas scattered all over your garden, it's going to be so hard to control those pests because you're going to have to run all over the garden. You're going to do spray or net or whatever. But if you plant them all in one area, then you know, well, all my cabbage loopers are going to be in this area, so I can just do a quick check for cabbage loopers. I can, I can net them better if I want to net them and keep, I can, it's a lot easier if I want to make some organic sprays. It's just so much easier if all your brassicas are in one area, and then you move that whole family around, to a different zone every year. So I'd say it's especially true for brassicas because that's where the most pests are, and also for nightshades, like your peppers and tomatoes and stuff. Peppers are pretty easy, but tomatoes will have a lot of pests as well. So you keep those in the same family and move them around. So lots of different ways to do crop rotation. If you want to, just plant it a different spot every year, do a 4-year rotation, mix heavy feeders to light feeders. Keep your vegetable families together and then move them around every year. So it's really about like, how much planting you want to put into it or not. But at the very least, don't plant everything in the same spot every year. And then you have companion planting. So this is a cool. So they found, this is a fantastic book about companion planting, Carrots Love Tomatoes, and they found all these different combinations of plants that work really well together. Like for some reason, if you plant basil really close to your tomatoes, I don't really understand it, but supposedly your tomatoes will taste much better. Don't really know how it works, but a lot of people have agreed on it. Or if you like, there's a Three Sisters garden where people will plant, squash first. They'll get the squash going, and squash and corn, and then the squash will act like a living mulch that will protect the soil. The corn will grow up as a trellis, and then you plant beans, and they'll grow onto the corn as a trellis, and then it all works really well together. They balance each other's, you have nitrogen fixers and heavy feeders balancing each other. So really cool. Like I really like this onion plantings, because onions or not onions, garlic is a really tough season. You plant those in like October and then you harvest them in June. So it's just an awkward, plant. So that's why I recommend a lot of times planting them as a border, because there's actually a lot of like nematodes. They're good nematodes and bad nematodes, but there's a lot of bad ones that will eat the roots, but they hate garlic. So if you plant garlic around as a border, that's actually going to prevent a lot of bugs from coming in and eating your other crops. So it's definitely like, yeah, I mean, you can get really deep into this if you want. There are some bad combinations, like potatoes and tomatoes. They share different blights, so they could, if one gets sick, it could make others sick. But yeah. All right, and I think the last thing I want to talk about in the planting section, and then what we're going to talk about these tips on planting, is succession planting. So if you have a small garden bed, this is probably not your thing, but this is if you have a large area that if you plan on planting a lot of something. This is a cool concept to try out. So succession planting, the idea is, let's say you want to plant a lot of lettuce. But you don't want to, harvest all that lettuce at once. So you do things where different amount of lettuce becomes ready to harvest at different times. Like one of them is like, I'll if I want this whole bed to be lettuce, I'll seed lettuce on one row, wait 2 weeks, seed the other row, wait 2 weeks, seed the other row. And so you just keep on doing that. And then by the time I'm harvesting, and so then all of a sudden I have a lettuce that's ready to be harvested, every other week, or like if I don't harvest all 1 week, basically the goal is once that I'm basically harvesting lettuce all year with this system, instead of just growing a whole bunch that harvest all at once and then I have no idea what I'm going to do with all my lettuce. So there's lots of different ways to actually do that, and there's lots of great plants as well, like some things like summer squash. So summer squash is like a big bush squash plant with like zucchinis and yellow squash. and they're so fruitful and they produce so much, but they really only produce a lot for like a month or two, and then they start slowing, and they may still slowly produce a little bit more, but what a lot of people will do if you want to maximize your production is you'll rip out, after a month of when it starts to slow, the harvest starts to slow down, they'll rip those out and plant another round, and then they'll get a whole bunch more, and they'll just keep on doing that all summer. Like beans and peas as well. Tomatoes, tomatoes are like most fruitful, for a couple months, and then they start slowing their production. They still produce a lot. You can still ride out tomatoes all year, but if you rip them out halfway through the summer and plant another round of tomatoes, you'll get a lot more tomatoes overall. You just got to time it really well, and it's a little bit tricky how to do it. I'm going to show you 4 different strategies that you can do with this. The first one we already talked about is just like, having the same crop, all the lettuce is the same type of lettuce that matures at the same time, and you just plant it every 2 weeks and staggered. And then, after a month, you'll have lettuce for all summer. Or you could plant, the same type of vegetable. Let's say there's a bunch of different varieties of lettuce, but they all have different maturity rates, which means like some of them you can harvest after 40 days. Some of them you can do it after 50 days, some of them after 60 days. So kind of, they all, they'll say that on the back of their seed packet. So then you can kind of plan it out. You can plant all of this, the whole bed at once, but you're going to harvest harvest the lettuces at different times as they mature. So that's another way to have lettuce all summer long. Another one too is, we're going to do this with our like romaine heads. So we stagger our seeding in the greenhouse. So every 2 weeks we do another row, we seed another flat of romaine. So that way when we plant our whole bed full of romaine lettuce. And then we harvest, as we're like harvesting them and cutting them out, we're replanting them with another round every week of romaine lettuce. And that way we can keep on serving romaine all year, while not losing much production. And then intercropping, we're going to talk a lot about intercropping. Big fan of intercropping, but this is like, so like you have like on this is garlic that's almost ready to be harvested. So this person planted, lettuce in between the garlic, and then once they're ready to harvest the lettuce, the garlic's or they're going to harvest the garlic as the lettuce, it gets bigger and bigger and needs more space. So it's more like a timing issue. So that way you can plant, different rows of lettuce all over your garden, as things are slowly starting to be, pulled out. And then that's a great way to kind of add, some different staggered, beds. We'll talk a lot more about intercropping as well. Yeah, okay, so let's get on to some planting tips now. So the first thing you know, we talked about this in the last class, but just, most of the instructions that you need on planting is going to be in the back of your seed packet. So you just want to, things to look for. You want to look for, does it need full sun or partial sun? Row spacing versus plant spacing. So plant spacing is like, okay, I'm going to dig a trench and I'm going to space out these carrots every 2 inches. And then row spacing is I'm going to space out each row every foot. You can get, you can have tighter rows if you stagger the plants a little bit, but that's what those two mean. And then planting depth, usually twice the size of the seed, days of germination, or how many days it should take to pop up, how tall it gets, and then there's usually instructions on like carrots. You dig a trench, the seeds are so small that you can't do one every 2 inches. So you just like sprinkle carrots into the trench, cover it up, and as it starts germinating, then you go back with scissors and you thin them out every like 2 to 3 inches. So basically everything you need to know is on the seed pack, and if you don't, some seed packets don't have instructions, but you just Google it find an extension agency or something website, and they'll give you some good info. And then we talked about all this stuff for the direct seed versus seedling transplants. So these are a list of things I would recommend to direct seed. That doesn't mean you can't grow them as transplants. So direct seed is when you directly plant the seed into your garden bed. Transplanting is when you grow them in a greenhouse or basement with lights, and then when they're nice, when they're nice baby sized plants, you plant them in the ground. So ideally, you want to do as much as possible seedling transplants, because that's going to really increase your production. But these are the list of things that don't transplant very well. Doesn't mean like you won't find these things as seedlings at the nursery, or you can't try them, and go for it and try it. You can make them work. I'm just saying these are the list of things that typically people don't transplant, because either they grow so fast, or their roots are really sensitive and they don't like to be disturbed that much. So. But we talked a lot about this already. And then seedlings, we've also talked about this as well. But when you go into a store and you want to buy seedlings, definitely some things to look for. You want like a short and sturdy seedling. You don't want a super tall one that looks like it's going to fall over. You want a strong stem, because that one, if you plant a super tall, lanky one, that one's just going to tear it apart. So you want to have it short and stout. You definitely want to go ahead even in the nursery, grab the seedling at the base, pull it out, and you want to be able to see the roots, but you don't want to see the roots wrapping all around it. If you see something like this, don't buy it. It's just going to have bad root growth. You want something like this. This is basically a bad nursery that didn't pot up their seedlings as well. You can get ones that have 3 or 4 per seedlings, and that's additional plants. So you can pull them out, and you can either pot them up, pull them apart and pot them up, or you can just pull them apart and plant them. But they won't be as strong at first as if it was just one in there. So, but they'll catch up, if you take care of them. So sometimes, it's all your preference. If you're comfortable with pulling things, seedlings apart, or if you don't want to disturb the roots, just look for ones with just one, and don't buy anything. Like sometimes I used to see like a tomato with a little fruit on it at the nursery. I'm like, oh, it's halfway there, but don't buy that, because you want your seedlings to really focus all their energy on root systems at first. So if it has fruit already, it's just gonna it's not going to be it's going to focus too much energy on that fruit and not enough on your roots. And then we talked about this as well, but just plant, when you have tomatoes or really leggy things, you can plant them really deep, especially tomatoes. You can plant them, halfway down, 2/3, 1/3, whatever you're comfortable with, and then whatever you plant in the ground. Tomatoes have special, they're really great about basically creating a root ball at any part of the plant that you bury. So eventually, it will look weird, but eventually everything you plant under the ground is going to turn into a giant root ball, and you're going to have that much stronger and healthier of a tomato. And then best time to plant and water and harvest. So ideally, when you're planting, you want to avoid the really hot part of the day. So you either want to plant in the morning or late in the evening. Oh man, there's just all kinds of things. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, you want to do it on preferably on a cloudy day, because basically when you pull those seedlings out, you got to get them in the ground as quickly as possible, or they're gonna they're gonna dry out really quickly. So if possible, do it in a cloudy day. Do it in the morning or in the evening. Don't do it when your soil is wet. Unfortunately, though, life happens, so sometimes the only time you're available is like at noon on a sunny, super hot day. So if that happens, if you can, bring an umbrella, or at least keep your seedlings in the shade as long as possible before, pulling them out, or don't do that thing where everyone pulls their seedlings out of their, they'll pull all their seedlings out and then they'll lay them where they want to plant them, and they're just frying on your bed while you're, don't pull them out of the cell until you're ready to plant. We actually, like today, I had everyone, because we had a lot of volunteers, we pre-dug every hole. And then that way, we could just slide them out the cell and put them in the hole super quickly. So you want to really minimize your exposure to the sun. But like I said, sometimes you just gotta, you gotta plant them whenever you're ready. Whenever you're free time. And then the best time to water as well, same time in the morning or late afternoon. If you water during noon on a hot day, most of that water is just going to evaporate before it gets absorbed. But if that's all you can do, that's all you can do. And then best time to harvest as well is during the morning hours, late afternoon, because when you harvest things in the middle of the sun, you're gonna things are gonna wilt. You can pop them back up by putting them in a glass of water or dunking them, you know, or if they're real wilted, you could put them in, give them an ice bath and they'll pop up, you know, but then you got to eat them really quickly. So it's just best to you know, harvest them, you know, you want to plant, you want to water, and you want to harvest at the coolest parts of the day. All right, so now I'm going to play a quick video on the different ways that you can plant your lettuce, because there's multiple different ways, from seedlings to direct seed. So this video is a really great video, kind of covering all of them.
In this quick video, you're going to learn the best way to grow lettuce to ensure a high amount of output in a small amount of space. Over the years, I've tested several methods, from transplanting to harvesting the full lettuce head and letting it grow back again, from transplanting to only harvesting the outer layers, and then from the high intensity direct sowing and cut and come again. Now I'll review what the best method is and how to do it. This is Tim from Organic Backyard Gardening. The benefits of transplanting ensures a head start. However, you don't want to plant them too closely when transplanting. I plant my lettuce 4 per square foot. It takes several weeks until you get a full head that's ready to harvest, and another few weeks for it to regrow another head. Alternatively, you could just harvest the outer leaves, and I found between these two methods, harvesting the outer leaves gives you a little bit more output. But the best method I find is really the direct sowing, very tightly and intensively. And this requires the least amount of work because you don't have to start your seeds inside. So let's take a look at how I do this. You're going to dig small trenches about 6 to 8 inches apart, and you're going to sow your seeds very heavily in those trenches. Do not thin the seedlings. They're going to grow something like this, very tightly. Since they're so compacted tightly, they're not going to get to full maturity. But you can begin to harvest as soon as they're several inches high, like about this size. You're then going to harvest across the rows. This will allow the front to continue to regrow, and you'll continually harvest further back, further back. With this method, you'll have a continuous harvest of lettuce. You'll get a way higher output. You don't need to start your seedlings indoors. The only thing you'll need is a lot more seeds, but when you start to buy a larger quantity of seeds, they become less expensive. When you're doing this, also make sure that the seedlings stay moist at the beginning when they're young. If they don't stay moist, they'll dry up. I like to use this method in any free nooks and crannies of the garden. In this example, I have them sown right next to my celery. I found with this method, the plants are much more durable and they bolt much slower as opposed to the transplanting. If you like this video, please click the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when we post new videos.
All right, so the one method, like we'll have a whole class on harvesting, but I want to kind of show you that the one method that where when they're cutting it and they're leaving like a couple inches of lettuce left, that's called cut and come again. What's great about that is that lettuce will keep on growing back, and you'll get multiple different harvestings during the season. You can do that even with like the full heads. When he was harvesting the full heads somewhere else. As long as you leave a little bit of the plant, it will keep on. You'll get another head or two. I mean, it'll be slower and smaller, and it's probably more efficient, like just to pop in a seedling afterwards if you have extra seedlings. But if not, they'll keep on regrowing as well, and that's called cut and come again. All right, now potatoes. Let's talk about potatoes. So there's 2 different types of potatoes. There's like, I guess it's like white potatoes or or conventional or whatever potatoes, and then there's sweet potatoes. And we'll talk about sweet potatoes in a second. But sweet potatoes are tropical plants. So they love the hot, humid weather, the summers. But normal potatoes, these are cool weather crops, but they often will grow all throughout the summer, and you'll harvest them maybe mid to late summer or late or early fall, depending on the season. But to make potatoes, you want to get what's called seed potatoes, and that's basically you could order them, and there's basically a cut off portion of a potato with like 1 to 3 eyes. These are called eyes. These are where the green the germination, the stems are going to grow out of. So when you dig, ideally with potatoes, you can, ideally if you have a lot of them, it's nice to dig a trench and put them in, have the eye go upward, pointed upward so it can grow right, and then cover it in. And with potatoes, you do a thing called hilling up, where as the potato gets grows upward, you take a rake and you keep on adding more soil to the bottom of the plant, and that because it actually produces more tubers as it's growing up. Like sweet potatoes, the roots grow downward, and the tubers grow on those roots. But these, the more you pile up, the more potatoes you'll have. So you have to do that like 2 or 3 times throughout the growing seasons. Keep on adding soil, and then you'll get a lot more potatoes. And I'll show you another trick in the next slide of how to do that. But when selecting potatoes, there's 3 different kinds of potatoes. And that's really about maturity time. So you plant most of your potatoes around, like they say St. Patrick's Day is the big one, but basically like March is when you plant. Like right about now is a good time to plant potatoes. But you can either select, early season potatoes, or much smaller, mid-season, mid-size, and late season are the really big ones that you can store throughout the winter. So it's really about the maturity days, and the idea is you want, so you want to, yeah, it depends on what type of potatoes you want, but it's a good idea to kind of put that in your calendar. Like if you're doing an early session, in in like 3 months, you should be ready. But so then, and then that's another great way to do succession as well. If you want to have potatoes all summer, you can plant a whole row early, a whole row mid, and a whole row of late, and then you can harvest them whenever the maturity times comes. And new potatoes are basically when potatoes are right when they're ready to be harvested. So the tops are still green. You can harvest them early if you want some like really tender potatoes that you have to eat. But if you want them to store for a while, you should let them completely mature, and then you're waiting for like the tops of the greens to start dying back and drying up, and that's a good sign that it's ready to you're ready to harvest your potatoes. Yeah. But yeah, new potatoes, I've even seen people with mounds, like if you have really nice fluffy soil, you can even like just like shove your hand in there and like find a couple potatoes and pull them out, and then eat, do that every day, and you can eat a couple potatoes if you don't want to harvest the whole thing, and you're planning on eating them that day. But anyway, oh yeah, don't eat green tomatoes as well. That's when like sunlight hits the actual tuber, and it's yeah, it'll make you kind of sick. So if you have green tomatoes, definitely avoid eating those. And then, so a lot of people, because hilling up can be like a pain in the butt, and especially if you don't have extra soil. I mean, you don't have to hill up; you just won't get as many potatoes. But if you want to maximize your potatoes and you really don't have a lot of extra soil to hill up, another great way is growing your potatoes in a bag. And then that you can use like a burlap bag. I know like Compass Coffee on right next to in Shaw, next to Bread for the City area. They have like when you walk into the door, they just have big stacks of these burlap bags over there to get their coffee in, and you can just you can grab, or at least before the pandemic, you used to be able to grab them. You might want to ask them, just to double check. But yeah, you can get these bags. Get grow bags, whatever. You just want bags where water can, it's not a container. You want the water to be able to drain. And the idea is you roll them down, roll the burlap bags or whatever down to like, a foot tall, and you put, some nice soil in there, like, maybe like 6 inches, put a couple seed potatoes with the eyes upward, and then cover them up. And then as it grows, you keep on adding more soil. So that's and then it grows, and that's a great diagram of it. It starts out on here, and like I said, sweet potatoes, the roots grow downward, and then that's where the tubers are. But these white potatoes are reverse; they grow upward. So adding more and more soil upward, you're going to have more and more tubers, and then you wait till the top starts, dies back, and then you just dump the whole bag, and it's super easy to harvest as well, and so you don't have to like dig them all out. This is great. The only downside to this is you have to water it like twice as much because it dries out really easy. So you really have to be on top of your watering game if you want to do this. But it's a pretty great method to try it out. So a couple of, what's the name of the coffee shop in Shaw with the burlap bags? Compass Coffee. So Meg says, I work for Small Plains Coffee in Ivy City, and we have tons of burlap. Awesome. So Small Plains Coffee in Ivy City. Check that out for free burlap. Some says, are they expensive? I mean, no, most people are giving away burlap for free. I mean, if you go to like Home Depot, you can buy burlap, but like I said, coffee shops, they get all their coffee being shipped in burlap like this, and they're just, tons of free bags as well. So yeah, Meg, if you could bring some to letter, that would be fantastic, if possible. No worries if it's a hassle. Cool. And then, all right, sweet potato. So even though it has potatoes in the name, it's like completely opposite of like the other potatoes. These are tropical plants. They love the heat. They love the humidity. They hate the frost. But one cool thing is like you plant what's called slips. So you don't do the seed potatoes. I mean, you could probably do that, but mainly you want these slips. You could buy the slips, at a nursery, or you can make them yourself, and it's super easy to make. It's like a science project. Basically, you just get like a sweet potato. I definitely recommend saving one from your garden or buying one from like a farmer's market, because a lot of this stuff, like when we talk about sweet potatoes and garlic and things like that, if you get it from the grocery store, a lot of times they spray things to make it not germinate, or you don't know like what habitat, what's the where they're from or how they're going to do in the area. So it's nice just to go to a farmer's market and just buy a sweet potato, or save one of your sweet potatoes from the year before and use it. But the idea is you put it in a glass jar, you put some toothpicks on it, you fill that up with water. Really important, change that water, daily or every other day. Because I kept on doing this, and the sweet potato kept on rotting. And I realized that I wasn't changing the water. So you need to change the water pretty frequently. And then all of a sudden you're going to see all these sprouts popping up in slips, and usually wait till they're like 5 or 6 inches, and you can just pluck them right off, put them in a glass, of water, and then after a week later, you'll have, all these roots, and then after May, you need to wait till the frost is down. So wait till about May or June, just plug them into the ground and plant them, and then they'll just grow out. A lot of times, I love planting sweet potatoes on like a tall bed or a planter, and just having like all the vines and stuff kind of hang over. And you can also eat the sweet potato leaves as well. We'll talk about that during another classes too, but they're pretty nutritious. Or, another way is you can just cut your sweet potato in different sections, put them in a little bit of water, and then they'll sprouting as well. So the whole process takes about 8 weeks, give or take, so it's good to start this in March and April, and then plan to plant them out in May to June. And if it's your first time, do a couple of them, just in case one ends up rotting, for some reason. So I'm going to play another video about some of those techniques and with sweet potatoes.
In years past, when I've grown sweet potatoes, I've started them the more traditional way, by putting toothpicks in the sweet potato, and you can see the roots here develop, and then eventually I just noticed you start to get a little sprout here. It always takes a long time, and I wanted to try something a little bit different, and that would hopefully be a little bit quicker. So instead, I started some in soil, and these were both started at the same time, and this method has been so much faster. This method couldn't be easier. All I did was take a foil pan, poke some holes in the bottom, fill it halfway with potting soil, and then nestle the sweet potatoes in it. I put it under my grow lights and on a heating mat in my seed starting station. And before long, I was amazed to see that the potatoes had already kind of rooted in the soil. That was my first clue that this method was going to be a lot quicker. And then I started to see these sprouts form. You can see these, this is what we're going for. These are potato slips. You can see these long slips. So I've already harvested 2 different sets of sweet potato slips. These first ones were from about a week ago, and you can see that roots are already growing pretty good on these. These were just from a couple of days ago. I harvested another batch of them, and they already have some small roots going. So let me show you what I do. So when you get the slips, these long kind of sprouts is maybe a better word for them. You get these long sprouts, and I just kind of cut it off at soil level, strip the bottom leaves, and I'm simply going to put it in a jar of water and let it root. And once these roots have formed, this is what you're going to plant in the soil about 4 inches deep, 18 inches apart, in order to plant sweet potatoes. That's how we grow sweet potatoes. So you can see from this, I'm going to have lots and lots of slips. I'm going to be sharing these with everybody who comes to my gardening class next month. So I'm going to have lots of sweet potato slips before these sweet potatoes have even really gotten started. I'm really excited to share this method with you. Give it a try and get some sweet potato slips growing. Thanks. Thank you so much for watching.
Cool. So that's another technique. You know, both techniques work well. I haven't tried the soil one, but yeah, I've heard that it works really well as well. Oh yeah, slips produce sweet potatoes. Yeah, so each one of these slips, that's what's so you can have one sweet potato, you can get like 20 or 30 of these slips. You pluck them out, root them, plant them, and then each one becomes a new sweet potato plant that will produce another 20 or 30 sweet potatoes. So one sweet potato could yield, if you do it right, I mean, and you have the space to grow, you can get hundreds of sweet potatoes just from one sweet potato through this method. All right, so let's talk about one more question about sweet potatoes. Are sweet potatoes still edible once it grows slips? That's a good question. Usually at that point, they start shriveling up a little bit. I imagine, you can boil it, and I'm sure you can eat it. But a lot of times when things flower, they convert a lot of sugars to starches. So I imagine it's probably not as tasty. But yeah, you could probably still eat it. It's just probably not as tasty, I'm guessing. And then after a while, it'll just start shriveling, and you wouldn't want to eat it anyways. All right, so let's talk about shapes. So another classification for plants are what kind of the growing style. So there's 2 main growing styles that's out here a lot. I'm sure there's more as well, but these are the ones that you'll see the most is pole and bush shapes. So pole is basically vines. Vining, it's just some plant that likes like beans or something like that, or winter squash that just loves to grow on a vine. A lot of times they'll climb a trellis, or some of them won't climb it, but you can make them if you tie them to the trellis. Like tomatoes. Tomatoes aren't like naturally climbers. You have to tie them to trellises. But like beans and peas, you just plant a bean and pea next to a trellis, they'll just shoot right up it. So and that's a good way to kind of save space, because like a lot of these things will just grow on the ground forever and just take up huge amount of space. Like watermelon will just take like a huge amount of like a 10 by 10 area. Or if you can train the watermelon on the trellis, suddenly you can grow the same amount in a small space. So so basically when you see pool or vining, that really means it's a good idea that you're probably going to want to build a trellis for that. And then there's bush, or is much more compact. So this is like a short, compact plant. We're going to talk a lot more about it in container garden classes, but these are fantastic for containers because they're not going to get super tall, so they're not going to fall over in the wind. They won't need a trellis. Most bush plants don't need trellises, and you can also other words like dwarf or patio, like patio cucumber or patio bush, compact varieties. They also call beware of baby. Baby refers to the fruit. It doesn't refer to the size of the plant. So like a baby eggplant is just small eggplant fruits, but the eggplant is still just the same size. And these, yeah, typically don't need varieties, you know, like indeterminate tomatoes or like more, or determinate tomatoes are more small bushy tomatoes that oftentimes, you know, it couldn't hurt to give a trellis, but a lot of times you can get away with it not doing a trellis. As opposed to like pool and vining things have trellises. And then so there's, you know, definitely there's plants out there that you can, you know, get them for whatever style you want, like peas and beans. You can choose if you want, you know, a climbing bean or if you want a bush bean or a climbing pea or a bush bee. You typically get more fruit from the pool ones, from the climbing ones, but also it's more work. You got to do trellises and all that stuff. And as opposed to like just doing a row of bush beans that will just get like, you know, maybe a couple inches tall and it won't produce as much, but you'll still get a whole lot of it. So if you're looking for low maintenance things, I definitely recommend bush stuff. Or if you just have an area that you can't, you know, you can't do a trellis or you can't let it grow around, you know, definitely you look for the bush varieties. And then tomatoes, we'll talk more about tomatoes later, but yeah, there's two different types of tomatoes. There's an indeterminate. So that's like your sun golds. That's like most of your tomatoes that just would grow forever if it had the right conditions. You know, it will get 6 feet tall. You got to trellis it. You don't want tomatoes growing on the ground because there's lots of soil diseases and stuff. You'll have a super. I mean, you can. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's you'll lose a lot of fruit if you let it grow on the ground, and you'll have a lot of pest and disease issues. As opposed to a determinate tomato. So that those are small, compact tomatoes, like Roma tomatoes. A lot of your sauce tomatoes. They're much more bush-like. I mean, it couldn't hurt to give a trellis, but sometimes you can get away without a trellis for those. And then there's so those, you know, you can choose what you want. Do I want a tomato that's going to be 6 feet tall, or do I want a short and compact tomato? And then there's things that are typically have one shape. And I say typically because you can definitely find a hybrid of any shape you want. But these are like, you know, like winter squash. Those winter squash are like pumpkins and like your more hardier gourds and like butternut squash and stuff like that. So the winter squash typically grows like on a vine and just like, you know, grows all over the place, takes a huge amount of room, but then produces tons of fruit, you know. That being said, you could definitely find bush winter squash. And like I've definitely last couple years, I mean, they have a bush variety of any winter squash you want. As opposed to summer squash. Summer squash is typically more of a bush shape. You know, it's a big bush, but it will stay more, you know, compact. You know, you'll still need a couple feet spacing for this, but then and then that's where all your zucchini and yellow squash. So I say typically a summer squash is a bush and a winter squash is a vine, but like I said, you can find the varieties of whatever. And then peppers and eggplants are typically more bush-like. A lot of times you don't need to, you know, trellis peppers and eggplants. Couldn't hurt, you know, but a lot of times that they're fine without trellises. You know, and then like, you know, things like pool, like cucumbers. Cucumbers typically are vines. You know, melons, sweet potatoes are all things that like to vine and grow. Cucumbers, there are some bush varieties. They're kind of hard to find and they're not quite bush like. They're more just kind of miniature cucumbers plants, but you can definitely find some. And same with melons. You could find, you know, sweet potatoes though. I mean, I've only seen vining sweet potatoes, so as opposed to like, you know, normal potato or whatever, white potatoes or whatever. I always forget what they're called. The typical, you know, the non-sweet potato, we'll say that, is you know, that's more of a bush like, you know, as yeah. So definitely these are the standard sizes, but like I said, you can find just about anything in any size that you want if you look long enough for it. And then peas and beans. So this, like I said, is a really great idea. Even if you don't like peas and beans, incorporate these into your garden and when just in a small little space and move that space around every year because it's going to add nitrogen. It's going to fertilize your garden. They're nitrogen fixers. So there's typically 3 types of pea. I mean, there's tons of other peas as well. There's like, you know, sweet peas, which are flowers. There's like field peas, which are cover crops and farm. But I mean, typically you're going to plant 3, you know, if you're looking for an edible pea, there's 3 different types of peas. There's snow peas. Those are the like the flat ones that you see in a lot of the, like Asian restaurants, Asian cuisines. You can eat them fresh, or you can cook them. And then there's sugar snap peas. Those are like the plump ones. They're a lot more juicier. These are the ones I love. I'm a big fan. I try to grow as much of these as possible, but both of them are pretty tasty, fresh eating. But these you wait till they're plump before you harvest them, as opposed to snow peas, you want them flat. And then English peas, you have to shell. The outside shell is not edible, so you have to kind of just pluck on. You can just squeeze out or pull out all the pinch out all the peas, and just you can eat the peas as well. I just we don't bother with shelling that much, so we just do the fresh eating ones. And then oh, I wrote that wrong. That's not, but that's supposed to say beans. Sorry. So beans are there's lots of categories of beans, but I'm just going to talk about two categories: shelling and non-shelling. So shelling and soup and dry, these are all your like fava beans, lima beans, which are they also call butter beans, kidney beans and stuff. So those you got to shell. You could dry them, you could cook them. There's lots of great things you could do, but it takes a little bit of work. And then non-shelling, if you're not looking for, if you're looking just to have edible pods that you can just throw and just boil and eat. So these are your green beans, your string beans, your wax beans. A lot of times those are interchangeable words, but this is a great variety from Johnny Seed Select. Actually will sell you like 3 different types of green beans that you can grow together. And if you want like the multiple, version, as opposed to like the shelling ones, like you can, I mean, they're easy to squeeze out and stuff, but it's just a lot more work. And then, so that's basically the deal with peas and beans. And then corn. So there's lots of different types of corns out there. Corn is something that you need kind of a lot of space, because it's a big plant, that takes up a lot of room. I mean, you can plant them, a foot spacing, so you can plant them tight, but it still takes up a lot of room. And you only get like 1 or 2 with the edible. For like for the animal feeds, you can get 3 or 4 or 5, but for the edible ones, you only get 1 or 2 ears per corn. So if you don't have a lot of room to plant a lot of corn, it's not really, it's not huge, I don't know. I mean, it's up to you, but it's not, you're not going to get a lot. But basically, like if you're going to plant corn, you want, look for sweet corn if you're looking for fresh. Popcorn's great. So we're actually going to do, I'm really excited about this. We ordered a bunch of popcorn. We're going to, because we did sweet corn last year, but it's just not a whole lot. And we didn't have a whole lot of space. So it was just a handful of people got some sweet corn. But what we're going to do popcorn, and we're going to harvest it all in the fall and just pop it all and have a popcorn festival. So that's a way, if you want to feed a lot of people, with corn, go ahead and pop it. And yeah, I'm really excited. You guys definitely have to come to our popcorn festival this fall. And then there's also like ornamental. This is one of the coolest corns ever. We grew some of this. It's called glass corn. I didn't realize it wasn't edible, but just as cool. I mean, it's a really awesome ornamental corn that you can make, different decorations from. But there's lots of really crazy, beautiful ornamental corn, and that's typically flint corn, which some of it can be edible, but most of it's like ornamental or animal feed. And then there's corn for flour, there's ornamental, animal stuff. There's a really great article if you want to dive deeply into all the different corns and check them out. But yeah. And then corn's unique from a lot of vegetables because it's wind pollinated, as opposed to a lot of other vegetables are insect pollinated. Most of what you're going to be growing. So that's why, like, even though it's hard to resist, like, especially like since they're so tall, a lot of people will plant corn. And it's just like a single row in the north side and the back of their garden, which is fine, but it's going to be hard to pollinate them. Because ideally you want to plant corn in the box. Because that's gonna because what happens is, like, so the pollen's up here in the tassels, and that will slowly over time it'll start loosening up, and then the wind will blow it, and then the wind has, and then it has to go to the next corn, and it has to hit the silks. And that's like, there's hundreds of silks in each one of these corn plants. So each one of them has to have their own individual piece of pollen that land on it. So if you've ever had a corn cob and it was missing some kernels, that's because it didn't get fully pollinated. So you can imagine it's kind of hard to like, the chances, if it's just like a single row, the chances of it, hitting and completely pollinating is kind of low. But if you plant them in a box, or a square, and then that's no matter where the wind blows, it's going to increase your chance of getting full pollination. Or if you want to ensure pollination, definitely you can hand pollinate them, but that's whenever you start seeing the pollen on the tassels start to get loose, you put a paper bag over it, tie it at the end, go out every day and shake it a little bit, and then when you have a lot of pollen in that bag, carefully pull it off and then put it on top of a silk, and then leave that on the corn cob of the silk, for a day, a week, and shake it once a day. That's why a lot of people like like a lot of organic farmers will do this, because if there's like GMO corn that's like down the road and the wind picks up and that gets all the pollen gets blown into their cornfield, suddenly their organic corn is GMO. So that's why they'll when their silks are ready, they'll cover them up, and they'll that way they'll ensure it stays organic. All right, planting garlic. So garlic's an awesome crop to plant. So many great things about garlic. It's just a very awkward season. Like I said, you plant them in October. They might sprout up a little bit, and then you mulch them in over the winter, and then you harvest them at the end of June. And it's kind of like, what do you follow up with at the end of the June? So it's a little bit awkward, but that's why if you do it as perimeters, or if you if you save some summer stuff and seedlings and plant them, so it's a little bit tricky. That's why I just have my own special place for garlic, and then I'll intercrop okra next to it, and then as the okra is coming up, usually we're ready to harvest the garlic. So intercropping works really well, because we plant the seeds in May, but the garlic isn't ready till in the June. So by the time we pull the garlic out, the okra is germinated and it's like a foot tall, so it's on the way to get So I find okra and garlic is a really great intercropping. But garlic, there's a couple things to know about garlic. There's two different types. There's hard neck and soft neck. Hard neck is like you have an actual stem, a hard stem to your garlic, and soft neck is more like it's not a stem, it's more like a leaf, long narrow leaf. And that's why if you ever see a garlic braid, that's done with soft neck. Hard necks are more like you can't braid those. So hard neck, yeah. So if you want garlic that tastes like the grocery store garlic, that's soft neck. So if you want like the standard, garlic taste, if you're looking for like unique, different versions of garlic and different flavors, and you want to kind of get into the culinary world of unique garlic, definitely check out hard neck. Hard neck, it can survive the cold better, but I mean, both of them are fine in this area. And hard neck has garlic scapes, which is like a flower that comes up, and then you wait till it does like a circle, and then you cut it out before it gets woody, and it's like such a delicious mild garlic taste to it. It's super good. And soft neck doesn't have that, so that's one downside. But soft neck, stores better if you're looking to store things for garlic over the winter. And you could do cool braids as well. But garlic, basically, you choose your hard neck or soft neck, or do a combination of both, which I usually do. And then you plant them in the fall. Like, it's one of the last things you put in the garden, usually around October. You basically just break out the garlic. Don't use grocery store garlic, or less. Maybe if you have an organic one, you can use it. But I definitely recommend doing farmers market garlic, ordering garlic from a seed company, or just storing your a couple heads or bulbs from the year before. You break it apart, you leave the paper on it, you put it in, with a little, the tip of it pointed upward, space them out, 4 to 6 inches, 2 inches deep, pull the soil over, mulch them really well, a couple inches of mulch. And like I said, sometimes they pop up in the fall, sometimes they don't, it's fine, but then they will in the spring, they'll pop up, and they'll have like a single green stem that goes up. And then late May, if you do hard garlic, it will get the scape. So you want to pay attention, because if you let that scape grow too much, it will get woody and kind of bitter. And you definitely don't want it to flower. If that flower opens up, it's gonna kind of ruin the whole garlic. So I wait till like it does one circle, and I'll cut it out, and then it's just super tender at that point. And then you wait until late June when the bottom half is brown, and then that's when you can pull them out. And then you got to cure them and all that stuff, which we'll talk about in the harvesting class. But yeah, that's garlic. And then asparagus. So asparagus is a perennial. Asparagus is a long-term investment. It's like a fruit tree. It takes like 3 years before you can start harvesting them. But once you do, I mean, you're going to harvest them from like 10 to 15 years. So it's definitely worth the investment if you have a space that you don't want to use for anything else for a while. So you order them, or a nursery, you just order the root system. Basically, it looks like this crazy looking spider. Dig a trench. Some people will have a little mound in their trench, and they make it look like they're kind of like riding a horse on the mound. And then you can bury the whole. I just bury the whole thing, but sometimes they recommend like a potato. You hill it up slowly, but I have no problem just burying the whole thing. And then yeah, it'll slowly come up, and then they're just like small little sprouts at first. And then just water them and mulch them and take care of them, and they'll get a little bit bigger in the next year. And usually about the third year they'll come up as like the pencil size asparagus that you see in the store. And those, at that point, you can it's usually in the spring, you can start harvesting. You can start cutting them out. They'll keep on sprouting up. But you want to spend about a month or two harvesting them. But they'll just be springing up. But once they start slowing down and they take a little bit longer to spring up, that's when you want to kind of just back off, because you don't want to harvest them till it's dead. You just want to kind of get a good like month or two of asparagus, and then you just leave the plant alone and water it, and it just kind of rebounds. And every year you'll get a little bit more and a little bit more as it gets like bigger and bigger. But that's asparagus. Oh, and then the intercropping. So this is so I'm a big fan of intercropping. It's basically it's like incorporating time with space. So a really great way to look at it is you're maximizing your space by mixing fast growing things with slow growing things. Or mixing things that are about to be harvested with things that are just getting going. So like a perfect example of this is cabbages, and then but it's going to take like 2 months for that cabbage to take up that whole space. So in the meantime, this person planted radishes all around, and radishes are like the quickest growing thing. If you ever want to grow something in a month, pick radishes. And so they're going to harvest all these radishes as the cabbage gets bigger and bigger. And then by the time all the radishes are gone, that's when the cabbage will slowly take over the whole space. And this is a great one too. Like tomatoes, you got these baby tomatoes are slowly going. In the meantime, they planted lettuce in between the tomatoes, and they'll be able to harvest the lettuce in like a month and a half, 2 months. As the tomatoes get bigger and bigger and slowly take over the whole space. So it's kind of like squeezing in little things here and there, and the timing wise. I'm definitely a big fan of intercropping. If you could, figure it out. Sometimes it's a little tricky, but if you can figure it out, you can definitely maximize, some of your production. And then intercropping to change the seasons. So this is nice because like a lot of times, so typically the standard is you plant your spring garden, in March, and then in May you rip it all out, and then you throw in your summer stuff, and then it takes like a month or two until your summer stuff start fruiting, and then you start eating that. But then you rip that stuff out, and then you throw in your fall garden. If you're doing a 3 season, like I said, you don't have to do a 3 season, but if you are, so there's always a break in between, harvesting and then replanting, and you always have to wait a month or two before you start, things are ready to be harvested again. So if you want to kind of avoid those breaks or really decrease those breaks, you could do an intercropping version of changing the season. So this is a great example where this whole bed was full of lettuce heads. And so the person was growing their pepper seedlings in their basement. And then as they harvest the lettuce head, they'll follow up with and they'll plant a pepper in this place. So they're not going to mix up all the whole soil. It's kind of a non-till. You might throw some compost and mix it up a little bit, but and then as they every week they're going to be harvesting more lettuce, and then they're going to be planting more peppers. And the hope is like by the time they're done with their last lettuce head, the first pepper is maybe producing some fruit at that point. So that's, so a lot of it's like, timing. It's not a perfect science, but it's definitely something cool to, try to, experiment a little bit with. Um, like these, they planted tomatoes in this lettuce row, and as they're harvesting the lettuce, the tomatoes are going to take more and more space. So hopefully by the time they're done with the lettuce, the tomatoes are going to start fruiting. Um, and then, oh yeah, and like for kale, so a lot of this times when kale gets like too, when it starts getting too over, heated, it will actually bolt. And a lot of times I'll keep the kales in there because this is a kale flower, and if you cut that off, it's like a broccoli rabe, so you can saute it, and it's super delicious. So sometimes I'll keep things a little bit extra, and I'll plant my warm weather stuff around there just so I can get that bolt, and then I cut it out and remove the whole plant. So it's definitely some reasons to kind of extend your season a little bit longer. And then the last intercropping that we do, and I keep on meaning to take a photo of it, but I always forget, is so cover crop. We came up with a system to do cover crop because cover crop's a little, you want to do cover crop. We talked about in this first class. You don't have to if you're a beginner gardener. Like I said, in the winter, when everything dies, just buy a bag of mulch and cover your soil and you're fine. But if you really want to start like really, building up your fertility in your soil, cover crop is a fantastic way to do it. But it's like at the same time, you got to start a lot of your cover crops when your fruits are still, your plants are still producing. Like these tomato plants, a lot of times they're still producing, tomatoes. So in the conventional ways, well, you rip these out a little early, even though they're still producing, and then you seed in your cover crop, and then a month later you have a thick cover crop. So what we do with things that we trellis, especially if we prune them and keep the soil open, is like usually around September, October, I'll take a hard rake and I'll weed the bottom of the bed. I'll do this for tomatoes and everything we trellis, peppers and eggplants. I'll scruff up the surface, and then I'll seed in my cover crop and then let that germinate. And it takes like a month or two to germinate. So we're going to do this in September. We're going to keep on getting in tomatoes all the way to November until the first frost. And then at that time we can rip the tomatoes out, and then we have a nice, bed of cover crop. So a lot of it, you can see this, it's a lot of tricky timing with a lot of gardenings. Like I said, you don't have to do all this stuff, but this is, it's not beginner stuff, but it's definitely a really cool way to maximize your production as well. And then our last section we're going to talk about is maintenance tips. So different ways to kind of take care of all your stuff. One of them is mulching. Definitely recommend, doing some kind of mulch. Definitely like straw works really well. The hardwood mulch as well. You could do living mulches where you actually seed like white clover. So it's a great way. Mulch, one, it prevents you from having to water all the time. It will actually hold in moisture a lot longer. So that way, a lot of times, like a lot of the gardens, like if you mulch really well, you only need to water a couple times a week. But if you don't mulch, in the middle of the summer, you're going to have to water every day. So and at the same time, also it increases organic matter. It breaks down and feeds your plants. It prevents a lot of tomatoes, like they have soil-borne diseases. So when it rains, it splashes soil that's full of like tomato blights onto your tomato, and then you get lots of diseases. Like you ever see the yellowing of your the bottom branches? That's a type of tomato blight, and you can prevent that by actually using some kind of mulch to keep it from splashing up. So it just protects your soil in general. So there's a lot of great reasons to use it. Definitely recommend like straw and shredded bark. Clover is a little tricky. Clover is a nitrogen fixer, so if you can pull it off, I usually, when I do living mulches, I'll let the actual plant establish itself, and then I'll seed it like a cover crop, where I'll scratch the surface and seed the clover. My idea is the clover doesn't compete too much as long as the other plants are established. I wouldn't plant the clover at the same time I planted the cabbage. because then it might compete a little bit. But then if you do that right, the clover, it does the same thing. It protects the soil, and at the same time is adding nitrogen to that soil. So it's really, really cool living mulch. Don't use hay. Hay's for horses, straws for people. So hay is like if you chop down a wild field of grass, and then they usually feed it to horses because it's got lots of seeds and stuff. Straw is like a agricultural grain, like barley, where they chop off all the tops, and then you're left with straw. There might be some seeds in it. For the most part, though, it's basically just stems. So try to get straw as much as possible. I wouldn't use really wood chips as well. I use wood chips for walking paths, but if you put them in the garden, a lot of times they can absorb, soak up a lot of your nitrogen to try to break themselves down. I mean, eventually they'll return it to your garden, but it's just it doesn't work very well with your nitrogen. So I use the wood chips on your paths, not in your garden, and avoid any kind of dye mulches because a lot of times they use some toxic stuff. But the only thing with mulches, you never do more than like an inch or two. If you do if you do like 6 inches of mulch, water is not going to actually get to your soil. So you want a light, amount of mulch. And then be aware, the only downside is you may get some slugs. If you start seeing your leaves eaten like this, you may have some slugs. They love to hang out in the mulch, but beer traps, those, putting a little beer in a cup and putting them out there work really great with slugs. And also coming out at night with a headlamp and doing some squishing, but we'll talk more about pests, that in our pest class. Garden cover. So this is we're just getting into this. This is really fantastic stuff. If you could do it right, it's a lot of upfront work, but it's definitely a great way to kind of really reduce your weeding. So garden covers are basically covers that it can be multiple different types. Some are a lot better than others. Some you do not want to use, but it can be anything from woven fabric that landscape fabric that actually is permeable. Water will saturate somewhat. It's got some holes. To unwovens. If you ever try to rip up some landscape fabric and you couldn't, it was like fused to those roots. That's the unwoven. Unwoven is more for like erosion control and things like that. Like I would not recommend unwoven in your garden because it's just going to be a pain in the butt to like rip up every time because it's literally these roots just fuse into it. And then there's these like corn plastic stuff that you can actually at the end of the season you can like chop up and it will all break down to your soil. But we use mainly the woven, and then we use landscape staples, the staple in. But then we actually burn our holes. That's the only problem with it is you have to burn or cut your holes. So we'll make a jig out of plywood with the spacing that we want for, like, say if we're doing a whole row of kale, we'll space it out staggered like a foot and a half, and then we'll get a blowtorch at Home Depot and just burn the holes. It's actually really fun. We did a whole bunch of it last week, and then you plant directly into the holes, and then you don't have to worry about weeding that much. There's still going to be some weeds, mainly coming from the holes and the sides, but it's not that much. But definitely would recommend. This works really well with drip irrigation because even though this is permeable, it's a little bit harder to water, but you can also still water straight in the hole as well, and it works fine. So I'm actually going to show a video of how all that works, just explain it a little bit better.
So essentially what we were doing before is we had a board. This is just a piece of plywood. It's 1/2-inch plywood. Got a couple 2x4s on the end of it to help lift it up. You could put handles, whatever you want. And the way we did it before is we just measured our 6-inch centers on this board. So we're using this one for Salanova lettuce. And so we just had like 1/4-inch holes in there, and we would go and use a white spray paint can and make holes and then burn them with the fabric. And then when I showed this to Ray, he liked the idea, and then he skipped a step, and it works. So that's what I'm going to share with you guys. So essentially what we've done is we've just made the holes bigger using one of these guys. It's a 2-inch, whatever you call it, thing that cuts pieces of wood. And so we drilled the holes in like this. And then we're just using a simple, I guess these like a mini tiger torch kind of thing. You can get these at most hardware stores. They have a camp stove, butane on them, camping gas it's called. And I'm just going to strap on the head cam and let my actions explain the rest. One thing I'll point out is Mark just modified this here, and he put a couple notches on the board to line up with the lines on the fabric. And so I'm doing 3 at a time. So I've laid down 3 fabrics. These are 50-foot fabrics, and I've cut them. And as I move it, I'll line up the last 2 holes here with the ones on the edge. And then I'll make sure I line these 2 lines up with this to keep it straight. So that's pretty much it. We did about 3 at a time, and that's just the number we've decided to go with. You probably could do more if you wanted to, but we found that this way is about twice as fast as when we were painting them on and then doing it by hand, because we don't have to be as careful with the torch. So if you guys found that useful, please hit the subscribe button right now. Like and share these videos with friends, and if you want to see more stuff like this, please check out my online course, profitableurbanfarming.com, and my book at theurbanfarmer.co. All right.
All right. I've never actually read the book, but I feel like if I'm using the video, I should include the plug. Yeah, so I mean, like I said, like you don't have to do this if you want to try it out, we're actually going to burn some more fabric sometime in April. So you can definitely join us, and that's the best way to try this stuff out, is just to do it, with us. And it's actually a lot of fun. But we just got done, burning a whole bunch the last week. All right, so tomatoes. Let's talk about tomatoes. So there, like we said, there's 2 different types of tomatoes. Is indeterminate and determinate. Determinate are the small bush-like tomatoes. They don't need to be pruned. They don't. Some need trellises, but a lot of them don't need trellises. They're pretty easy to handle. Indeterminate tomatoes are like your sun golds, your slicing tomatoes, your early girls. These are most of the tomatoes people are going to grow are indeterminate, and these will grow, super big if you let them, like 6 feet, 7 feet. If you give them the space. But they're, you can just let it, grow on the ground, and you'll get some tomatoes, but things will be kind of messy. Then you put them up on the trellis, and you can let them grow on the trellis without doing anything. You'll get a lot of tomatoes, but you'll get a lot of like vegetables or veggie growth as well, leaf growth. So one of the reasons why we prune them is to increase our fruit production, but also to increase circulation and sunlight, and which will reduce fungal issues and diseases it may have, and it will also decrease like pest and disease issues as well. So basically, when we're pruning a tomato, we want it to look like a giant tree with a single stem. Some people will do 2 stems. I've seen that happen as well, but typically, try it out on just, as a single stem, and try that first. And the idea is you plant your tomato, you just let it grow, you don't do anything at first, and then you wait till you see the first flowers, and at that point, you can usually snap these off pretty well. If it's a big if you feel like it's going to tear the plant, get some pruners, but you can just snap off the bottom branches. For some reason, they don't have much fruit. The flowers go upward, not downward, for some reason. And at the same time, like we said, like all the diseases, there's a lot of blights and diseases and stuff in the soil around your tomatoes. So if a plant bends over and touches the soil, it's going to bring that disease up, and it's also going to allow pests and disease issues. And plus, when you can open it up and have a clear bottom, you get way more circulation, which is going to be, you're just going to have a healthier tomato plant if you do that. And at the same time, so you remove those, and then also you want to kind of keep an eye out for what's called suckers. So this is what's going to make your tomato plant a giant, vegetative bush that's going to be more leaves than fruits. Suckers are they're these little branches that will start growing in, and every armpit will have one. So it's a good idea, like at least once a week, if not like a couple times a week. You want to do a sucker check where you go to your tomatoes. And you find them in there. You want to find them, small if possible. And when you see one, you could just with your finger, you just pluck it right out. It's not going to be if it gets too big, you'll need some pruners. But we want to pluck them out because this is just going to be lots of extra leaf growth and not so much fruit growth. So that's why you want to keep on plucking them in each one of them, because you want to maintain this structure, single stem, and then you have branches going outward every couple inches. And if you do that, you're going to have a healthy plant. You're going to have some really healthy fruit as well. Eventually you just I always give up. I try to stay on top of my suckers for first half of summer. And eventually you just give up and you let your tomato just go crazy. That's what most people do. But at least the first month or two, try to be on top of your suckers, so just so you can have a decent structure at first. And then and a lot of times and it's good to, if you start seeing some fruit really early, you want the plant to be at least 1.5 feet tall before you want to see some flowers. So if you see, if you have a little tiny seedling and flowers pop up, pull those flowers off, because you need that plant to really focus its energy on the root systems. Not so you want it to be at least like I said, 1 foot or 2 before it should start flowering. All right. And then cracking plants. So you see this a lot in this area. I used to think it was like a slug or something that was just crawling over and eating the tomato, but really what this has to do with inconsistent moisture levels. So if it rains really heavy for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden it's super dry and hot for a couple of days, the plant will soak up all this water, and they'll grow really quickly. And then thinking that there's going to be more rain, and all of a sudden it's dry for a couple of days, so it will overgrow, and then it kind of goes back and it cracks a little bit. You can see that with tomatoes, mostly, sometimes with cabbages and things like that. The best thing to do is just mulch your tomatoes. That way you can have more of a consistent moisture level. So it's not going to dry as quickly, and it's going to, it's just going to be more consistently moist, and that should reduce the cracking. And then thinning your plants. So when you plant little things like carrots, and a lot of your root crops like carrots and beets and things that they're so small, what a lot of people do is they'll just dig a trench, and then they'll sprinkle the carrots in, and then they let them pop up. And ideally you want to have a carrot every 2 to 3 inches. So when they pops up, you want to thin them out. And there's multiple ways you could do that. The easiest one is just get some scissors, cut out all leave the best looking carrot every 2 and 3 inches, but you want to cut out 90% of this, and then have 1 carrot every 2 to 3 inches. You can also transplant them if you want. If you have more spaces, you can kind of slowly with a knife or something, or a plastic fork, kind of scoop them up and replant them around your garden. I really like the harvesting technique, because these are especially with beets, the tops are really delicious. So you can just slowly, you can make a salad once a week, and you could go and just kind of harvest a handful of beet tops, and you just do that, keep on doing that until eventually it's spaced out every 2 to 3 inches. And but you want to wait till you get the first true leaves. So remember, we talked about the first leaves are always these condylemon leaves. They all kind of look the same, but then the first true leaves, which are your second leaves or whatever, and that's when it starts looking like a carrot or a beet. At that point, you can go ahead and thin them out, whether it's in a seedling tray or in your garden or anything like that. Now we're going to play a video about thinning.
Here we are in the urban seedling home garden with the terrace. These are beautiful carrot seedlings that are all clumped together in a nice big clump. It is very hard to not have clumpy carrots, because the carrot seeds are so small. If this is your case, you can certainly transplant them very delicately. shortly because root vegetables do not like to be transplanted. So what we want to do is get right in under, try and disrupt the roots as little as possible. Break them up, and you really want to have one of these beautiful seedlings per 2 inches. So you can have 16 per square foot. It's honestly better not to transplant. So if you have a bunch like this, best to just choose the most beautiful radish or radish carrot and remove the rest. But if you do want to try transplanting radishes, just grab your radish seedling by the leaves, because the root and the stem are precious. The leaves will just grow and grow. Do a nice big hole with your finger or with a pencil or a chopstick. Drop it in. And close up gently. You want the soil level to be at the same soil level that it was when you took them out of the ground, which means that all the white part should be covered. Anything you start from seed needs to have its own area to grow. So this is going to be true for beets, for your beans, for anything that you're planting from seed. Make sure that you have enough space for each seedling. Followed by the leaf, not the stem or the root. Oops. Should work out. If you are going to transplant your carrots, they should be this size, very tiny. Any bigger and it's pretty much too late. You want to get it before the first set of true leaves come in. So I'm going to go through and space these beets a little bit better.
Cool. I definitely recommend doing that on like a cloudy day, not on a super hot day. All right, so I want to talk about pollination for cucurbits. So cucurbits are remember in the family they're like your squashes and your pumpkins and things like that, and melons. So the problem with cucurbits is they have both male and female flowers. They're not like a lot of other plants have both, male and female parts in the same flower, but these have different ones. You can tell the female has an ovary underneath, and that's what produces the fruit, and then the male is just for pollen. And the problem is if you just have one squash plant, a lot of times the female plants flowers will open up, and then they'll close, and then the male will open up. So they don't open up at the same time. So it's really hard for to get the really good pollination. That's why a lot of people, if they're planting squash, they'll plant a couple squash plants just to increase the chances that the pollinators get everything. But there's one foolproof way that you can do that to ensure that you have 100% pollination, and that's you can self-pollinate them. And that's really where, when you start seeing a whole bunch of female flowers starting to open up, find a male flower, cut it off, pull off all the petals, and just kind of stick it into all the female flowers, and kind of roll it around a little bit to get all that pollen in there, and just do that for every one of those, and you'll have 100% pollination. And you can even, if you have a lot of leftover males, it's always good to leave a couple of them, in case you get more female flowers. But you can also cut them off, and they're really great edible, like stuff them full of ricotta cheese, bake them with like honey, all, you can make fritters out of them. They're super, super delicious. But you don't want to do that with your female flowers, because that's where you're going to get your fruit. And then a lot of times, a lot of plants that have their own, they have both male and female in their flower, like tomatoes and eggplants. A lot of nightshades have that. And the main insect that fertilizes them and pollinates them are bumblebees. because they'll get in there and they'll just like shake the whole, they're really good at shaking. So they'll shake the whole plant as they're in there, and that just, the pollen just flies everywhere. But sometimes if you don't have bumblebees, or you don't have like the right insect that's shaking them, and you can go out there and you can, give if you're not getting good pollination on your tomatoes, which you get good ones in this area, like you don't really need to do this, but if you ever like you're getting a bunch of pot flowers that aren't pollinating, you may want to go out and just grab each flower and give it a little shake every day. Or I know a lot one gardener I met swore by this, one of those like sonic toothbrushes, is just like a bumblebee, and she would put it on each one of these flowers and she would have perfect pollination. But I mean, we have enough bumblebees in the area where you should be good, but just in case you're not getting good pollination, that's something you could do. Blanching is a way to kind of shade different kinds of fruits to keep them like very tender and not bitter. Like cauliflower, like the head, if the sun hits the head too much, it's gonna get bitter and tough and woody. There's actually self-blanching cauliflowers where the leaves actually will encompass and shade the head when it starts producing. But a lot of cauliflowers, if you're growing cauliflower, it's a good idea when the head starts forming to kind of tie up a couple leaves to just keep it in the shade so it doesn't, you don't want your sun on your cauliflower. You want to keep it tender and not bitter. And you can do the same with celery. Celery is really hard to grow. You gotta water it really hard. But if you do want to try celery, you could do the same thing to keep it tender and not bitter. I believe this is going to be the last thing I'm going to talk about. So thank you all who made it through, but we're going to talk about trellises for a little bit. And then we're going to actually, one of our field days, we're going to really experiment with a lot of trellises. But trellises are, I mean, especially if you have a small space, I definitely want to, do as many trellises as you can. Get your pool, like I say, if you don't want to do trellises, look for bush varieties. So you don't have to do, so they're nice and bushy. But if you're doing a lot of viney stuff, like indeterminate tomatoes, squash plants, things like that, peas, definitely want to think about different kinds of trellises. And like I said, there's two different kinds of plants. There's ones that climb. So peas, all you gotta do is plant the peas right next to anything and they'll start climbing it. Cucumbers, they'll start climbing it. A lot of different melons will. But then there's like tomatoes and pumpkins. They just haven't figured out how to climb things. So you can, if you watch, like, there's a lot of like stop motion stuff on YouTube on how like a pea plant climbs. They just do these circles until they hit something, and it's really cool. But tomatoes, they need some assistance. So you need to actually tie them. I really like this Velcro tie because you can reuse it, and you don't, and you can make it nice and wide. You don't want to like tie it tight because that's going to cut the circulation off. But also you can use, string. There's these little plastic clips you can use. There's lots of different ways to tie a tomato. So trellises, I mean, you can buy these little like trellis tomato cages at a garden store. They're like, $3 or $5, but they're pretty short. And a lot of these tomatoes are going to get, they may be 3 feet tall, and then the tomatoes are going to get 6 feet tall. So definitely recommend, if you're going to do cages, you can actually get, if you go to Home Depot, there's a thing called concrete remesh. You can, for a couple of dollars, you can get a whole sheet. It's what they when they're building a concrete wall, they put this in the middle of the, while the concrete's wet, and it helps stabilize everything. But it's really cheap, and you can actually make really tall, big tomato cages out of it. You just want to make sure you want to use concrete remesh, because if you use like cattle fencing or something, that the squares aren't big enough to put your hand through, so you can't harvest you want to be able to actually put your hand through the hole, so you can actually harvest your tomato. And then bamboo, we're going to talk a lot about bamboo in the carpentry class, but you can do so many things with bamboo. And if you go on like Craigslist or different listservs, there's going to be people being like, bamboo's invasive. So a lot of times when people have bamboo, it just takes over. So they constantly have to have people come in and chop it down. So you can usually find people to get free bamboo from. But you can do all different kinds. I mean, do a teepee with peas, where you tie it to the top and you extend it out, put a string around it, and then peas and beans will grow up it. Or you can do different kinds of structures with it as well. In like tomato trellises, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. You can do as simple as just put like a bamboo stick next to it and just tie it, and then have it grow up and just tie it as it grows. If it gets too big, it might fall over, so it might be good to do some crossbars as well. But you know, a single bamboo stick will work if you get it in the ground deep enough. This is nice where you could pound in like some rebar or stakes, and then have some string that goes two ways. And the idea is like as the tomato plant grows up, you want it to grow in between the two strings. And then you keep on adding a string as the tomato grows. And the idea is the tomato is kind of wedged in between these two strings. And that the main thing about this stuff is you don't want to have too far of a space. Just have like maybe fit 2 or 3 tomato plants and then have a new bar. If it's too far, if it's like 10 feet, you know, a space, is eventually it's going to take down your bars. But if you do it like every 3 to 5 feet, have like a bar or stake in the ground, that works pretty well. And that's what it looks like once it, you know. So it's just like a wall of tomatoes. This is my favorite tomato trellis. This is what we do at a lot of places. Or letterer is we basically, you create some overhead system, and then you have a bar or rope that goes across, and then you have these little strings that come down. And like it looks like they're tied, but they're not really tied. I just take the string down, and at the base I'll wrap it around the tomato a little bit, and then the fibers and the tomato stalk actually hold onto the string. And as the tomato plant grows, I'll just keep on wrapping it around the string. And it holds really well. It's really easy to get in there and harvest, you know, like a tomato cage gets in your way a bunch, you know, but it's just a really great way to, you know, grow. Like I said, we'll do this at Letter, so you'll get a chance to see it. But it's a good idea. Sometimes the tomatoes will fuse a little bit into the, you know, so you want to kind of rewrap it or just give it some slack, you know, once a month, you know. But it's fine if a tomato grows into the string, because it will keep on growing. I've never lost a tomato on that. But I'm actually going to show a video a little bit more about how this actually works.
Hey guys, it's Bridget with San Diego Seed Company. I want to talk about tomato trellises. We've had lots of different systems over the years, and some have been really bad, some have been okay, but we finally found one that we really like, and I want to show it off to you guys. So this method came from Josh Satin of Satin Hill Farms. He is got a really amazing YouTube channel. You should check it out. But we saw this online, and we thought we'd give it a try, and we're so happy that we did. This tomato plant and my row of tomatoes here have never been this neat on our farm. And I give all of the credit to the system that we have now to trellis them. So it's a pretty basic system and very inexpensive. Another thing we really love. This is just 3/4 inch conduit. We have some T-posts here and some PVC tees. Basically, what you see is how you put it together. Really simple. The posts are driven into the ground. We run the conduit through the tees so that it'll hold it in place. And that allows us to have a structure strong enough to hold really heavy indeterminate tomatoes. All the tomatoes in this row are all indeterminate varieties that get really viney and long, and we just really need a lot of structure to hold them up. One of the issues that we have with a lot of the heirlooms that we grow is that they get really big, long, and then you can't keep on top of pruning them. So by having a system like this, it's very easy to keep the middle of the plant open for good airflow. And it looks great. They look healthier because I have a good system to trellis them on. So if you look down here, you can see that I've decided to go with 2 liters. So I have the main part of the plant here. I have pruned off every single leaf on the bottom. That's a really good idea, especially if you're in an area that gets lots of late summer storms. You want to keep any splashing up off the leaves. That actually helps with managing disease. So I've got my main stem here, and then I decided to go with 2 liters. You can decide to go with 1. We have enough space here that it warranted going with 2. And then I simply trained it to 2 different leaders. I have gone through and I've picked off the suckers. Suckers are the little part of the plant here that grows between the sun leaf here and the main stem. And you can simply, when they're this little, just break them off. The reason why you do that is if you leave this plant to grow naturally, this is going to grow off into almost a whole new tomato plant, and it's going to suck energy from all these flowers here. The point of growing tomato plants is to get tomatoes, right? You don't want a massive plant that just gives you 1 or 2 little tiny tomatoes. So by taking off these suckers, you're going to help control where it puts its energy, which is really important. So I'm following up the leader and I'm picking off any suckers. Here's another sucker here. Pick that guy off. And again, I'm picking the sucker off so that it sends its energy up into here. If I were to let this grow and get really big, it would be sucking all the energy from this cluster of flowers, hence the name sucker. So you want to get rid of those. So I've got my 2 leaders here, and I'm just simply winding them up the string. Another reason why I really like using the conduit is because I can slide the string and open my plants up. I like being able to have good airflow in here. If I let this get clustered and covered in all kinds of leaves and vines, that's going to be a good place for whiteflies to live, aphids, and then I also can't control the tomato hornworm, which we will get later on in the summer. So overall, it's just a beautiful system. It works really well. It's inexpensive. I love that I can use the string and these clips can come on and off at any point. So I can change how I want to do it year to year. So there's a lot of systems out there. I encourage you to try them all depending on your location and your needs. But for us on our farm with our row crop style planting, this system really has been the best. So give it a try and tell me what you think.
All right, and we'll have a chance to try that out at Letterer. So it is like, it's a little past 8:30. I've probably got about 5 more minutes. I'm just going to go ahead and complete it for the recording. But if you got a hard stop, that's fine. I understand. Like, I mean, our classes. I mean, there's a lot of information in a lot of these classes. So if you ever can't make it through, sometimes these classes are best to watch in a little bit at a time. So if you want to be like, oh, this is too much, at the end of the day, I can't take it. Well, yeah. I mean, you're fine to bail. I won't take it personal. And then like you just make sure to watch it. These classes, just watch the recording by the time we have the next class, because we build off of these classes. But it's a lot of information, so I mean, you guys know best if you can take it all at once, or if you want to do it a little bit at a time. But definitely do it. Yeah. But like I said, I got 5 more minutes. I'm going to wrap up really quickly just to have a good recording. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is like some of the trellises, like some of the bigger stuff, like heavier stuff. You may need to build bigger systems and stronger systems as well, like using different like metal pipes and like reinforced, like using more of this concrete remesh and like things like melons. You want to give them a little bit of support, like give them a little hammock or give, put them in pantyhose and they'll grow out into the pantyhose. Or this is a pergola where they have different types of pantyhoses where the melons are kind of but you want are supported and growing in them, so you want to give them some kind of support so it's just not hanging off of the vine, because it could if it gets too big, or if there's a storm, you could actually lose some of this crop. And then yeah, so this is I believe this is the last slide we're going to talk about. It's just we already talked a little bit about this, but like shade cloth. So if you're wanting to grow your cool weather stuff throughout the summer, like I said, I mean, they'll get a little bit more bitter. You may lose some to the heat, some of them may bolt. You'll have lots of more pest issues, but I mean, if you want to, but you can totally eat collards and kale and all that stuff all summer long if you want. And especially if you're cooking them down, you can cook out a lot of the bitterness as well. But and then in the fall they'll get sweet again as well. But if you want to grow them, if you want to keep them somewhat sweet, you can give them a little bit of shade cloth. So shade cloth is it's just like a see-through cloth. It's like you give them at different rates, like 30% the sunlight is blocked, 50% the sunlight is blocked. So 30 to 50% is good for these guys. You get T-posts, you can bend some hoops. We'll show you how to do that and as well in one of our classes. And then yeah, just give them a little bit of shade, and as long as you're watering them pretty heavy and you give them a little bit of shade but they're still getting some sunlight, that should really keep them from bolting and keep them from getting too bitter as well. And then or you can also like intercrop as well. You can intercrop the lettuce in between tomatoes, or plant some stuff behind a tall plant, and that will kind of partially shade it as well. So that's the kind of the goal, is to kind of shade it a little bit, but you don't want to completely shade it, because then they're not going to survive. And then row covers for pest protection. So definitely, if you're having a lot of issues with different kinds of pests, this is one of the best ways, organic ways to deal with pests. We'll talk about a lot. We'll have a whole class on pests, but having, floating row covers, where if you got small things, you use this. It's either called Remay or Agribon. You can get different versions. Like you want to get summer grade or pest cover that's really lightweight, and it won't trap heat, because then there's like winter, pest use winter row cover that you use for winter crops, and that actually captures some heat. So you want the really lightweight stuff. And when it's small, you can either throw one, it's called floating, where you just throw it over that stuff and put rocks and hold them down. But as they get bigger, you may want to get some hoops. So we'll talk about bending different ways to bend hoops, and then you can have like the whole area. And that, if you're going to use pest covers, you really want to, kind of install them within, the same day or really close to the same day, because you don't want to actually capture pests in this. Because if you wait like a week, and if you wait until there's aphids on this, and then you put the pest cover on, you just gave your aphids like a great home to like spread and multiply. And then if you have things that are pollinated, like that have tomatoes or squash plants or things like that, when the flowers open up, you definitely need to open this up so that the pollinators can get into there. But other than that, like we use them for a lot, mainly our cool weather crops, like our kales and brassicas and collards, because there's just the cabbage looper and the harlequin beetle are just horrible in this area. So we're going to actually be putting pest covers on for our real soon, so you can definitely check them out at Letter as well. And that's it. So there's just some more different books to check out if you want to get a little bit deeper. Definitely Doug Network, and shout out if you want to hear more about what's going on. But yeah, that's tonight's class. Like I said, I know like sometimes our class it's a lot of information. Like I said, you don't need to absorb all of it. A lot of it you don't even need to use. But like I said, if you're ever like overwhelmed, you can always, that's why we record these classes, so you can always come back and listen to it at your own pace. But thank you all for making it through the class. I'll stick around for a little while if anyone has any questions. But if not, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.